So, welcome to this new chapter. We will now place our forests. And to place forests, we have to do two things, probably three. First of all, we have to choose what trees we want to place. The second thing that we need to draw the areas where we want to have our trees. And the last thing is we need to have a point cloud where our chosen trees will get distributed. What I like to mention in the first place is currently in Houdini 19, it's not ideal to place those many trees with the layout tool. This will result in very, very long update times and very long render times. So I highly recommend to not do that. So we will use my self-made tree placement helping tool. This is the route that we will follow. So first of all, what we have to do is we have to draw an area where we want to place our trees, and I will start on the left side. So what we have to do is we have to drop down a new layout, and I will do it right here. And as usual, we will use the helper that I built, and I will connect the layout to our ground mesh, which is the foreground plane. And then I will zoom out. And this is probably now a workflow that you have to repeat for each tree line. And I will activate this, of course. Maybe we should link it here so that we are able to see the positions of our trees. So, and I will want to have our first forest right in here. So I will do a simple n-gon. It has to be in order, of course, nothing else. And then, of course, we also need to have, we can deactivate this, disconnect this. And then we have to have a new sub create. And in this sub create, we will create our point cloud. And we can call this PTS for points, PTS tree group 1. And we call our layout draw helper tree group 01. So, and then you will go to the ground asset that I made already. And when you dive into this sub create, you will see a pink network box. You will completely select it. It's just the tool to import a lob and to create a point cloud. And you will jump up back again and move into our PTS tree group, subcreate, and you will place it right in here. And we will place all of our, or we can even better call this PTS trees. Maybe that's even more optimized. And we use this for the mesh. So we will collect all of our point clouds in this object. We will make it pink so that we are able to find it again. So, and the other thing that we need is this network. So we don't need that, and we can disconnect that. And we also don't need that for now. So, and we will copy and paste this from here underneath. So this is our first group. Here I will choose what type of objects we want to have. So for now, we don't want to have bushes, so I will delete that. And here I will use the red pine tree 30 meters. Where is it? Red pine tree 30 meters USD. And then we will jump directly in our PTS trees foreground plane, subcreate directly in here. I will change back to on mouse up. And now we can see what we already have. And this is not the correct mesh that we currently drawing on. So we have to choose now our draw helper for tree group 1. So that's our mesh. Here we have our markers already. It will get split up right in here. So our markers are isolated. This works totally automatic. So then the projected mesh that we have generated from those points will have a better resolution and then get projected back onto our high-res geometry. So that's why we have to have a bigger resolution. And here we are choosing our resolution for the amount of trees. So I will think we have enough with 550 trees. So this point 1 has just a random value to rotate each of those trees in a different direction. So when you activate the particle origin viewport option, you will see each tree has a different rotation. You can even change those values right in here. But yeah, it's totally up to you. And we can call this out PTS tree group 1. Tree group 1. That's all we got from here. And those are our trees, our chosen trees. And we are now going into our instancer and rename this instancer to tree group 01. We will dive into it. And all what we have to do is we have to change this path exactly to the object that we have created. So it has the name PTS tree group for this one. So I will make it as bigger. We'll go down into the create, and here is our first out PTS tree group 1, accept. So our points are back. I will jump up and I will bake this to a new path. We go to caches chapter to chapter 4 and call this tree group 01. And here we bake this out. So everything is baked out. And what we now have to do is we use a new reference object, of course. Call this new reference tree group 1 and choose our cached USD file here. And then we will link it to our scene into a new merge. Something like here. Switch this to the right side. And we will, of course, deactivate those objects since we don't require them anymore. And in best case, we now should have to have some trees. Maybe we need to reload this. Okay, it's not working. We have to find out why. Our trees are loaded right in here. Explore variants. We prune some stuff. We have created a new collection, and have created a new instance group. And our instance group isn't working. The question is why. Those are our trees. We created a new collection, and I think we have found the issue. So here we have the red pine 40 meter, but the red pine 40 meter isn't existing anymore. So what we have to do is we have to make sure also the bushes are not anymore part of this collection. So what we have to do is we have to make sure that all of our trees, of our chosen trees, are right in here. So we will use those, and we will use this one. So we will go back and hit enter twice. So we have 3 lines. Drag and drop this to the second line, and on the spruce trees we select them with shift to the third line. Oh, back. We should switch to the third line. And now it should work. So now the instancer should work. And as you can see, the instancer is now working. I think this looks real great. So I will save this to disk, and I will reload this group. And the other thing that we also have to do, we have changed the exposure in our shot on some of our assets. So we have a different exposure on the ground material as well as on the road. That means we also need to take care about our trees itself, so to get a proper shading, and for this we have to change the render geometry settings a little bit more. So we go to our instance attributes and dial up the max diffuse depth to 3. We will bake this out once again. And for dealing with the exposure, usually you would probably think we have to create and change the exposure for all of these values. So I've placed an exposure in the roots, in the needles, and so on for each tree. And this is something we don't want to do. So this would take hours. And for that, we will use a property change, or we will do a property change, and we do this easily by first of all selecting this new tree line right here. We are moving down into our instances, into one of our materials. So we are going to big branches, and here I right click to exposure, edit primitives, and then we make sure that we choosing the exposure, not the base color and not the inherit. So we are going down to new edit, to edit primitive exposure. And now we create a new edit material properties node. And here we have a very long path, and this path is directing to this single node. But we want to have this active on all of our nodes. So we are deleting everything and writing down an asterisk underscore exposure. Since all of my assets, all of my tree assets, have the exact same exposure naming with the exact same function. So that's a really handy way to deal with those situations. So we of course need to activate that and probably crank up these stops by a value of 1 or maybe 2, 1.5 or 1.25. And that's all what we have to do. What we now do, we switch to our camera. We of course will deactivate our dummy forest. I will unlink it. We don't need it yet now. And I will save this file to 4.1. And we'll start a render when the scene has saved. Looking good so far. It has quite some loading time since the asset amount is really dense. and it is starting to render. This takes a couple of seconds since we have really a big amount of data, as well as many texture files, millions of polygons, hundreds of millions of polygons. And as you can see, it starts to render. The first sample always requires more time, since RenderMan will calculate the proper mipmap, texture mipmap scaling. It will choose one of these fitting to the scene itself. And this is the current result. And it doesn't look too bad. So we will let it render for some samples. Here we have the spray. And this is those are the trees, and they are a little bit dark. And what we can do is we go back to our edit material properties, and we will crank up this value even more to something like that. And it should affect the entire trees. And it looks good so far. I think it's a little brighter. We will see it in a couple of seconds. Yes, those trees are getting a lot brighter now. So yeah, this looks great. I think this is exactly what we wanted to see. So, and I will boost up this session now to place a lot more trees with the same procedure, and I will speed up this process for you so that you don't have to wait so much or so long. So, see you in a couple of seconds. So, what I did here is essentially I started to draw the first group of trees on the right side. So as you can see, I painted those helping objects with the layout. I disconnected them, and then I copied, pasted the old points PTS network, reused it with the new layout, changed the amount of trees, and here I just copied the tree instancer, the point instancer, changed the namings and the corresponding path variables, deactivated the old dummy objects, and yeah, made sure that it is working, resaved it, and did the same for the third group in the background on the left. So renaming is the most essential part. Draw a new line or a new area and recopied everything again. Same procedure, and then copying, renaming, and so on. Baking, of course. Unlinking of the old dummy objects and starting to render. It's always essential that you have to wait for these massive amounts of polygons. It always takes some time, and in the tutorial I always try to speed up those loading processes as much as I can. And when the amount of trees gets higher, the preloading phase is getting higher in or slower in performance. But when the first buckets are rendered, the image is quite fast. So what I did is I optimized the instancer. So I moved the exposure property edit up to bake it beforehand so that RenderMan don't need to recalculate the exposure values each time. And of course, restarting the process, looking again into it. And here I tried to render to mplay. This has also the benefit that there is no irritation on the licensing for RenderMan, so the possibility of a crash is very minor. And you'll also be able to see the final result in the final aspect ratio. And yeah, I tried multiple different sessions and settings. And here in new rendering. And this is essentially a process that takes so much time that I decided to speed up this. I think the entire those couple of minutes that you see right now were over an hour, or not close to an hour, but very in that area. And of course I rebaked everything and started to render again, saved it to a new file. As you can see, even when this was around 1 minute or so for starting the render, it works way better. So here we are back, and I did a lot of tests and I worked a lot on these trees, and the most important factor that I did to increase the performance during rendering as well as for updating of the shot is that I have first of all deactivated the motion blur on the windmills. So I have added a new render geometry settings here, and I deactivated the enable motion blur. So I completely turned motion blur off, rebaked it to new frames. So we have new blade values, blade rotation values, reloaded them. And the other more important thing is, on the trees itself, I have painted 3 forest areas, as you was able to see. And I had the issue that the render, the pre-calculation phase was really, really long. And in order to resolve that, I moved back again to the Explore Variants lob and activated nested variants. I did that because we have a really lot of amount of scattered and instanced leaves and needles and so on in those trees. So when you turned it off, you also have to rebuild your collection, since the collection itself will, you have to put new collections into those primitive lines. I also have moved the exposure changes to the overall group. This reduces the pre-calculation phase additional, and then I have rebaked all 3 forest groups out to disk and reloaded them as a reference. And yeah, this essentially leads to faster render times. In this example, 46 seconds. And I think for this chapter, this should be enough. Here in the background, I will do something different. So here in the foreground, we have those really high dense trees with a lot of variance. But here in the background, later when we work on the background, I will drop down only a few chosen examples of trees so that RenderMan don't need to load tree detail that we don't even see on this distance. So here we will use probably also smaller trees. But this is the result we have so far, and I really like what we see. So see you in the next chapter.